So here I am again, and I'm more than happy to announce you a fireside chat. So join author and OSS technologist David Mark Clements and VP of Engineering Luca Maraschi for a fireside chat as they draw on their combined 30 years of programming and industry experience to discuss topics ranging from high-speed CSSR with React to solving organization complexity with distributed system of React co- components. So, um, welcoming you, David and Luca.
Hey Anna,
Hi,
hey
guys.
Dave.
Hey,
How's your mood? How are you?
oh, my mood's okay. I'm just awake. I'm in Amsterdam, so I'm usually grumpy in the mornings, but I'm making a special effort.
Good morning. We also have morning. We have 9 a.m. in Ukraine.
Good
Oh
morning to you.
wow. So
Yeah.
Dave, you're
And,
gonna be
and Luca, what
my
time is it for you?
David,
Sorry.
you're gonna be my usual good night story, right? So here is 11 p.m. I just gave Nicholas to Julia for the sleep, and then it's your time now to sing me the song, right?
Luca and I often have a call at his time at night. That's what he's getting at.
Yeah, I hope you got a good rest before this fireside chat. So, so if you're ready to start your speech and to share a screen to talk, please tell us, and I will disappear and give you more space on the screen.
You
Yeah,
can
I
always
don't think
take
we're
it,
going to
right?
be doing any screen sharing. It's more of just a chat.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to be doing any screen sharing. It's more just a
Uh huh.
chat.
Uh huh. Okay. So, um, see you soon.
See you soon. Hey Dave, I love your mug, by the way.
Yeah,
I guess you got it in London, right?
yeah. I picked it up in London.
Yeah, I could guess so. Hey Dave, so I think it's kind of nice if we start our usual kind of chat. Maybe we know each other for some time, and maybe we can just give a quick intro to all the people that they are so patient to listen to our 40 minutes monologue. So maybe do you want to start telling something about yourself, just for the people to understand who we are?
Yeah. So I guess I'm. Well, I got into um, coding quite young age, and went with what was most accessible to me at the time, which was the browser. Um, and so really started writing JavaScript, HTML, and CSS in the mid 90s, 96, 97. And yeah, I mean, focused on that for a long time, and then did some PHP stuff. And then when Node was in its young early days, I thought this is going to be amazing, and ended up writing a book about it called Node Cookbook, and then got involved in doing consulting on Node and consulting on just general front end stuff, which turned into doing some React consulting as well. And that's where we met on the Node and React consulting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, my story is a little bit different. I started with when I was young, right? And I started actually writing games, and then I moved into programming microcontrollers, and then selling a couple of companies in the meantime, building a game engine. But I think I kind of always touched the front end side when I got into mobile development, and then I started play a little bit heavily and hard with iOS, Android, BlackBerry at the time, and try to kind of figure it out if there was a better way to write the same application on multi-platform. And so everyone went through building your own JavaScript interpreter for mobile. Yeah, and most recently kind of approaching large scale well, when we met, we started already the journey, right? Helping Fortune 500 and Fortune 100 companies to scale their digital transformation. And then, until last July, I was leading technology in Talos, and now most recently, I took a different kind of challenge, and that's more on the scaling up, startup to the next phase. And I think in this journey, in terms of like telling a little bit who we are, it's kind of interesting to kind of share some of our war stories on when we had a lot of fun traveling the world, and maybe a little bit more recently, our last touch base when we were before we kind of forked our, just to use a kind of techie term, we forked our way. And
Yeah, I think it's interesting to when you've been stepping into different companies and seeing how they're doing things. It's really interesting to see how trends can emerge, and what we noticed over the years, and it became a stronger and stronger thing, was the need for federation in large enterprise organizations as it relates to the front end, because to a certain extent, decentralization of ownership had already occurred in terms of microservices and things like that. But on the front end, and still you still see this. You have a lot of teams all contributing to the same repo or repos that go into a CI pipeline, and then a build occurs. So when you have 8 teams with 6-7 people in each or something like that, all building things for one site that's say built with React, things can get messy, things can break, and CI doesn't necessarily catch everything. You're only as strong as your weakest link in those situations. In one organization, which was a huge operation, we're talking billions, but they had a developer that modified array prototype and pushed that to live, and then it caused problems for loads of teams collectively. So it was and still is really, really easy to stand on each other's toes in the front end, and we've been looking at ways to address that for years now. So I think that's an interesting problem in the industry. Still isn't fully solved. It's more solved now than it used to be. But it all comes down to what we identified, right, as managing logistical complexity, because these are actually people problems and organizational problems and communication problems. But as per Conway's law, you replicate the way that an organization communicates is replicated in the technology that they produce and how they produce it. So when you have, as you tend to in large organizations, a dispersed ownership of many different things that collectively make one thing, and in some ways those things can be competitive, and also not necessarily not always friendly to each other, then that kind of thing then can manifest itself in the creation and deployment of code. So go ahead.
Dave, I think could be interesting to just go a little bit deeper, because you and I have been tons of conversations, right? And I think it all came from when we were all very early in the React. We are at the React Summit, so definitely it's worth to mention that we were pioneering kind of researching on how we could basically take React to the next level, right? And we both work in the past for Nearform, who made large investments in try to optimize technology for enterprise and for those kind of scaling problems. But I think it's kind of interesting to say where our consideration of scaling came from, right? So when the infamous server-side rendering in React that took us busy traveling the world, right? I mean, we cannot mention the customers, but I think we can high level say one of the largest media company in the world with a kind of very nice building in New York. Um, Same thing with large e-commerce in Chicago that I still remember the travel going down there. But we kind of have all of some history there, and we found out that basically Node as a growing technology was kind of somehow stopped, or there was some sort of natural break as soon as server-side rendering was put into place, and and the single-threaded nature of Node was put into discussion.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, I think when you're talking about React, depending on who you are, you kind of think about it in a different way. If you're primarily a front end dev, you really think about it in the context of the front end. But when, as we were and still do, we're focused on some part of the back end, and particularly Node, and using Node as a mediator as the front end of the back end, and in that sense of
back end for the front end, you meant, right? There.
Yeah. When you're looking at it like that, then there's a slightly bigger picture there, because inevitably the question rises, should we render on the server? So pre-React, you would use something like Mustache or something like that to create HTML templates, and then
Handlebar, Sass.
Yeah,
we all know them, right?
Using like jQuery or Backbone or even Angular, and that works fairly well. But when it comes to React, the way that the rendering is done is different. When you're rendering a template, you just concatenate the strings together, essentially. With React, you're creating a large tree, and then you're traversing that tree and serializing it into HTML on every single request. And when you do that, the size of your React application really comes into play, and you can start doing something called blocking the event loop. So it's a highly computational task. It's resource intensive, and it takes time to do in a way that stops I/O from happening, because the event loop is busy doing that.
Yeah.
If you have a lot of requests coming in, that can create real issues in terms of slowdown. You can have timeouts and different things, and it's really important to remember, especially if you're coming from a front-end perspective, that the browser has a one-to-one ratio with the user. So that event loop in the browser, the JavaScript event loop in the browser is one-to-one with the user. But when you're using it in Node, it's potentially thousands to one service. So it's a shared resource. The event loop in Node is a shared resource. So server-side rendering can be something that you think, oh, it won't be a big deal, we'll just turn it on, or we'll just set it up and it'll take half a day.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you realize, oh, we actually have problems here. It's the first thing you really need to think of. You need to think of this problem like laterally, and the first thing you need to answer is, should we even be doing server-side rendering? A lot of what we've seen, I think you've seen this as well, is most people think that they should do server-side rendering. And in some cases, they think they should do it as a performance optimization, because but like tools like Lighthouse and different things
Yeah.
will say, if you send HTML to the browser, then you're going to see something come on the screen, and then the library, the actual JavaScript framework or library, whatever you're using, is then going to kick in afterwards, and and then connect with the DOM in that way. So it should theoretically be faster, but if you've got a bottleneck on the server side, it's not going to be faster.
No, exactly. And I mean, I this year was my year about like serverless side rendering, right? The concept of like trying to kind of go away from server side rendering only when it's really necessary. I do deeply believe, and I saw, and I think you too, right, that most of the common use cases, server side rendering is just an excuse, and I think it comes a little bit from the history, right, of Node and React and so on, right? So it came all from Express having that kind of render functionality that gave some sort of sense of like one size fits all to everyone, which it was, right? And that, I think, what kind of, between kind of quotes, destroyed the whole right philosophy on how to build large scale distributed applications, right? And especially in 2020, I'm a strong believer, and especially if we are right now, imagine that we have a lot of front end people listening to our chat, right? And we are mostly focused on large scale, massive scale problem, right? And so we look on micro benchmarking and micro optimization, but if you look on the scale, right, I do think that actually that separation of concerns, that demarcation line between front end rendering and just pre-rendering, it's way more powerful than say, oh, let's server side rendering the hell out of it. And you have libraries like Next, for example, that try to have some sort of opinionated way and some sort of like a heuristic way of handling that thing, but I don't think it's heuristic enough, right? It's just like always gonna hit the bar of performances.
Yeah, I mean, my sort of general advice on it is, if you feel that you need to be sending HTML, we just brought it up, pre-rendering, snapshot rendering, whatever, they have different names for it, but being able to render sort of offline in some way, and then pushing that to the edge, if you can do it from a CDN, or if you can just push it into Nginx or something like that, or Kong, or whatever it is, that's that front as far forward as you can get it, which is more your area. But if you can do that, it solves the problem. But then, so that eliminates a whole class of people that say like, well, we need to serve the HTML for SEO reasons. We need to serve the HTML for performance reasons on the client side, and it solves both of those things.
Yeah, but I think the client side is still, if you think, for example, about, I think one of the greatest thing, and I'm very biased probably there, but React Native, right, which kind of doesn't allow for any server side rendering, right? It's just like, oh, mobile side render on you render it on this device, right? And I think that's a kind of very elegant way to define what is the separation of concern. I think React is mostly, I see React more as a very kind of functional framework to basically elevate the concept of components, right? Which, like you said in the beginning, the terms components is a little bit, I don't know how to probably say it correctly, but the terms component is a little bit misused, right? Because it's like the term classes, right? It's like you use it just because it's in your glossary and you say, oh, it's a class. But at the end of the day, I think that the value of components in large scale organization is accelerated and is elevated at the same time by like micro front ends, for example, right? That are so popular in the past couple of years. Are the new microservices are the micro front ends, and then probably in a couple of years we'll get another micro stuff, micro databases, for example. I don't know what's going to happen in the next 2 years, but I think micro front ends and React are kind of very interesting, match
Yeah, I think the one key thing that React brought to the web was componentization.
Yeah.
And it's what the browser standards have been trying to do. They were trying to do it. They changed the way that they changed what standards committees were doing with browsers. Started to do web components and things like that, which still isn't fully there. And the rest is really just API choices in React. But the componentization aspect, that was a breakthrough, and it changed the way that a lot of us thought about it. Before that, the newest modern thing was two-way data binding with controllers as MVC and on the client side, and that turned out to be like great for demos. You could do really fast demos with that, but once you started to try to scale that up, it became really difficult to debug. So the componentization aspect, I think, should really never go away. I think it's the best of many worlds, and this is why you see newer frameworks using components as well. And it allows us to abstract away from the details of whatever we're implementing in the browser, so that we can think about how these components are shared within an organization. And that's when you have things like design systems coming in, and those can be very interesting, and then they're very cool, but they don't solve the problem of logistical complexity. They help facilitate discovery. They help facilitate branding, and to a certain extent reuse. But both you and I have helped organizations that already had design systems with components, and it wasn't enough, because unlike with microservices, you don't have a discrete boundary. When you're working on a microservice and you deploy it, that you can't break across a boundary. So say if you coming from a Java background or something like that, and you're deploying a monolith, there's always ways to break the rules of whatever the architecture is. But when you're using services, that's much harder to do. So hard, in fact, people don't do it. And so we don't have that with components. So the components allow the abstraction of the way we think about things the same way that microservices do, but they don't have that discrete process boundary that essentially solves people issues. The most interesting thing that's come out of the last 10 years for me is that some people issues, some organizational issues can be solved with technological solutions. Another example is linting. When you have a linter that's enforced at the CI level, it changes people's behavior. But before that, you couldn't get people to standardize.
Yeah.
And it's the same with microservices. So this trend towards micro front ends, and there's a recent thing when we saw it, we were like, man, that's exactly what we were thinking, was the Webpack module federation. It's definitely on the lines of what we're thinking. So if you've not heard of that, do look that up, because it's key for this area where you need to be able to have that boundary around components. And if you can think about it in a different way, again, this is at scale. So if you're in a large organization right now and you're trying to figure out how do we collaborate better with other teams, and how do we stop stepping on each other's toes, and how do we stop duplicating effort, I think that the most effective next step is to have a cloud, essentially, of components that are actually deployed. And then when you're you're building your application, you still have your CI pipeline and all of that, but it builds something that the CI pipeline builds a consuming application from these clouds of components. So it can essentially be something that consumes a bunch of components into itself, packages those up into a browser JS bundle and potentially HTML, and then pushes those to the edge if possible, or at least caches them or whatever. Then you can deploy into that cloud of components a new component or a component update, and you've got versioning and all of that in there. And these consumer applications can then automatically pull that in, or they can have controls that only pull it in after manual sign-off, however you want to do it. But that can deliver some of what microservices give you and solve some of those logistical problems by making it more sort of something we just say, right, I'm just going to throw my code into this big cloud, and now people can consume that, and people can consume it in a way where I can't violate those component rules. I can't change the global prototype so easily and things like that.
Yeah.
And you can have checks for doing that and all that kind of thing. So you still need the people that then say, well, why do we need CI? So you still need the CI. What I'm saying is a live deployed environment of components that can be consumed live by applications is a step after CI that allows the sharing and the discovery and to some extent the process boundaries that you get with microservices to come into play.
Yeah, and I mean, you're touching one of the things that I kind of that I love, right? So I kind of advocate for the so-called service mesh since when was it? 2012? Yeah, when I built it in Amsterdam, right? For a company called Ice Mobile, we were building this large-scale solution, and we thought that we needed something that was an overlay network and that could kind of orchestrate all these things. So and without promoting, where I'm working now directly, but that's kind of the vision that I'm trying to kind of push forward. That is, and you just touched it, right? So I think we kind of passed the time of stitching, right? So all this compilation part that is very static, very
Right.
that creates this kind of overwhelming processes within organizations, right? And so we are in the world where the mesh is not a service mesh anymore, right? So if you look, we have serverless, that is some sort of conceptualized, mesh where things that are, because it's purely event based, then you don't need directly to connect pieces that are loosely coupled. And so I think where we were going at the time was to basically define this concept of we took it probably to the extreme with a system that was highly based on a graph that was based on this concept of consistent hashing to kind of self-balance and distribute dependencies and so on. But if you look, I think the concept of mesh is coming to a point where I think micro front ends are just like the beginning of this new phase. And I think even Federation is starting to kind of poke this idea that components that needs to be loosely coupled, and there will be some sort of overarching control plane. I deeply believe that the model of the mesh can be implemented everywhere. Right? Imagine having some sort of sidecar inside of your components. And that's what we built at the time. Well, you built, I just helped with the math behind it. But it is basically, you basically kind of subscribe and notify. And then you have a control plane which orchestrate and rebalance and, version injection. So we had this inversion of control system. But I think it's so elegant, right, where we are going. I think React gave us basically a primitive that is now getting obsolete as a framework, but we are coming down to this kind of atomic particle that is the component. And now the component will explode into this, quantum theory, where we are going to have this new version of a component that is going to live on this component mesh.
I like thinking of a component as a primitive. That's real nice. and I think that I know this is a React conference, but the focus should be less on React and more on how do we move forward in a componentized world. You have a lot of organizations that still are using Angular 1 and 2, and there's a lot of code that's been written, and you know, the entire industry has had this criticism many times, which is the amount of it was actually until React. There's a lot of criticism about churn, about we'll go from this framework to that framework to the next framework, and now we've been React has won that war, I think, for quite some time. But another way to and so one solution to churn is to go, let's just pick a framework and we'll all stick with the same framework. But in reality, in practice, that's not really how things go. And so if we could think about
the pipeline, Dave, sorry to interrupt. It's like you touched it, right? So the problem is that nowadays in 2020, we're still too sentimentally attached to a framework, and instead of detaching, like you were saying, right, and look at the primitive and say, do I really? So cloud actually took us in that direction, right? So to kind of sentimentally detach from hardware and transforming basically hardware into a commodity. If you think you just click of a button, you don't care if it's Dell, HP, or whatever, you know, Amazon, you know, Azure, GCP, whatever else is gonna come, will give you a machine, and you don't care. The same thing, I think it's, and that's why I think it's so elegant to what you just also said earlier on, right? That React is fundamentally introduced the concept of components and all the kind of reactive model, right? So if you think about hooks, if you think about then how GraphQL took this concept to the next level, doing this kind of live bindings, right, through subscription, which is super elegant. You basically kill WebSockets as a concept, and you just work into this kind of more duplex way on, you know, leveraging quick, hopefully, when it will be released, or like, you know,
I mean, yeah, it's going to be some years yet still.
But I think it's super elegant, right? And it is de-risking organization, because if you think about the primitive, you and we take a step back and look, and also, you know, I'm kind of invoking here all the front end developer and everyone, you know, using React. Just, I understand that there is a framework, but if we kind of for a second take this beautiful trip 10,000 feet up in the sky and look at the problem and say, nowadays major enterprise, they're still discussing what a component is, right? So, and I mean, I can tell you many stories in Talos where we had lengthy and very expensive meetings to discuss, is a component a widget, or is a component a button, is a component is a screen, is a component.
Yeah, but this thing about the components as a primitive, and thinking about it that way, there's two kind of thoughts about when code has been written. There's two what seem to be contradictory things. One is that we say, you know, the sort of modern code development, you should be able to throw code away. You shouldn't be attached to code, right? And that is true in that we should try to write less code, not more code, because less code means less bugs. Generally, don't try to be too clever and too terse or anything, but like, it's okay to throw code away. On the other hand, you have, you know, code is an investment. People have often paid for that code to be written, right? Yeah. So they seem contradictory, but I think what it is that you have business logic and then you have technical implementation. And the implementation of business logic is the thing that has value, and the actual implementation details are less valuable. So when we say, oh, we use this framework or that framework, that's implementation details. But what's contained within a component is often business logic, unless it's like a higher order component or something like that that wraps things or whatever, but which is implementation details. But when you have components that contain business logic written, say, in Angular 1 or 2, what you want to think, what people are thinking about is like, how do we move this over to React, right? in a post React world, that's going to be easier because it's more like with Angular, things are written with controllers and models and views, like old school Angular. I mean, and so there's more work to be done to like say, well, I guess we kind of make the directive kind of a component, and we sort of wrap it up that way. But you know, if we can start thinking about components and even writing components in an agnostic sense, or at least in a sense of like, well, how would we use this for something else? Like, I think that's a really interesting step, because now your investment is preserved, but you're not attached to the implementation details so much. So you're not beholden. The reason we talk about saying like, oh, you should be able to throw your code away, is so that you're not like locked into that, and you're not locked into technical debt.
Yeah.
And so if you can, the more we separate in our minds the component from the framework, the easier it's going to be flexible in future. I think that's the message I want to send out today.
I agree. I mean, once again, for anybody checking out what CTO.ai does, I believe in our mission statement. The world belongs to workflows that are made of reusable pieces, right? I think in 2020 we are wasting way too much time and money rebuilding the same user management system, right? And Auth0 is not the solution. Cognito is not the solution. Many other things that are not the solution. The solution is that as a developer, right, I want to invest more into what is valuable for my business and my next phase, more than rebuilding something that a million other people already built. And I think my message for today is to kind of be provocative in that sense and say, what is the next phase for a framework like React? What is the next phase for these primitives, right? How can we kind of avoid to rebuild the same thing over and over again, and just like think about this marketplace, right? I'm a very bad front-end developer probably, but I'm a bad developer in general. So I'm lazy and I want to just do things that somebody already did. I'm not interested. I just want to build something new, something, edgy. And I think if we do in this way, we enable this kind of mechanism where we look into evolving code more than iterating on the same piece of logic over and over again, right?
Yeah, and even from an industry perspective, I think I think we are starting to, and I think we do need to mature in the sense that we need to be thinking about the bottom line, which is the business logic, and not so much about reinventing the implementation concepts and things like that. But at the same time, if we can make our lives easier and we can take advantage of code the business logic code that's been created, then we should do that as well.
No, 100%. I'm gonna say something that probably is gonna get the whole audience against me, but I think in certain we are going through this iteration where we are taking a step back, but because we are preparing to make this leap for 2 steps forward, right? So I'm very positive there. The world of components, Microsoft and other ISVs already kind of dominated with Infragistics for whoever coded in Visual Basic or in .NET, making that grid that everyone was using, right? Because they nailed it. They said, if we build a component that can be reused by everyone to solve these business problems, they can focus on feeding this grid and announcing the grid over and over again. And I think we are ready for that phase, and I really believe that the future belongs to two things: a kind of transversal and cross-cutting mesh, where the service mesh goes into the business logic mesh. That's what I'm fighting right now, is like building workflows that can be reused, and then I think the future is there for having this component front-end mesh where and I think that you will see probably in 5 years, I don't know when, right? But there will be this universal control plane, and so our applications basically will become like this stitching together, putting pieces together, and then we will be able to not care about all these non-functional requirements like I mean, you are the creator of one of the most famous loggers, if not the most famous, so you know exactly what I mean. But the main thing is, logging is a solved problem, right? So
Yeah.
you
Uh,
build
you
Pino.
know,
Exactly. Nobody should write a new one. Just use Pino, right? If you're using Winston, just drop it. It's old. It doesn't make sense anymore. Use Pino. It scales. Don't reinvent the logger. Don't waste your time. Build something better, but not a logger. Like, don't build something that is already there, right? Just try to challenge what the next evolution is. That's probably my. I think we're running out of time,
yeah,
but
I think that's our time, but we'll be back in the Q&A in 2 hours, right?
yeah, if I'm not
If you're
already,
not asleep,
if I'm
I
not
might,
in
I might
PA,
be asleep too. I might go back to sleep.
well, thanks everyone for listening to our chat. And by the way, this is what basically we do almost every morning. So
And if you have questions, come back to us, and we'll be happy to dive into any details in the Q&A.
definitely. And I think you are muted.
Here I
Yeah.
am. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Perfectly.
Great. And like, thank you guys for this incredible chat. And for me, you seemed like two old best friends that met late at night in the bar and talking about the crucial thing in React components. That was really great. And like, I hope that our viewers got lots of information during this chat. Like, thank you very much. And we have another speaker waiting for us. So I need to say goodbye to you guys. And actually, we can meet you at the Q&A session if you have more information to share.
Lovely.
Okay.
Okay. So bye, guys.